It's day 117 of UConn's practice schedule. Let's talk about that. It's UConn basketball season, preseason or not. We're ready to rock. You're locked on UConn.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, just want to take a quick moment and ask for a small favor. If you're enjoying the content, please take a second to subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the audio versions wherever you listen. It really helps the show grow, and I truly appreciate all of that support. Every follow, every subscription, every download helps create more revenue for UConn NIL. Yes, Locked On UConn is donating 10% of all revenue to Bleeding Blue for Good. So by supporting this show, you're directly supporting the UConn athletic program's efforts through NIL. Thank you for being a part of this community. Really, truly appreciate it. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with a $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Well, let's bring in our guest to the program. Bring him on the show. Joe Arruda from the Hartford Courant men's basketball and football beat writer. Joe, you were at practice 117, as Dan Hurley called it. I think Haas actually brought that up. Maybe you could clarify that. But did you get the sense that right out of the gates, this UConn team is ready to rock as much as the coaches are?
Yeah, I mean, they're not ready to go play a top 25 game right now, but I think they might be able to hold their own. But yeah, I mean, they've been going for, I looked it up. June 2nd was 117 days before practice 117 or whatever they called it. But yeah, that was a funny thing. It was, we talked to the players first and we asked Haas about it. Is there anything different about the first day of practice versus, your workouts, which they've been doing all summer,
right?
Or with aligned with the NCAA rules, of course. But, and yeah, he's like, yeah, this is like day 117. So someone brought that up to Hurley, and he, of course, loved it. And they had a graphic ready and all of that. So yeah, that was a funny moment. But watching, we got to see about 15 minutes of the practice, and they look good, but they're going against each other, so it's kind of hard to judge it, of course. But yeah, it was funny. I think the funniest part about it was we got in there, and it was probably a minute or so, maybe 2 minutes after, Hurley rips the ball from a manager and just whips it across the gym. And part of me was like, all right, he did that because we're in here, because I couldn't tell what he was mad at. But yeah, I guess he'd been banging his head against the wall and doing some things he didn't want to do, he said, during practice.
Yeah, I get the sense that Dan likes to, for kind of like psychological warfare, just kind of do random things like that. Like you said, maybe just because the reporters are there and he's just like, you know what? I'm going to show them that I haven't lost anything. I don't care that we won back-to-back titles. Like, do you get the sense that that's part of it? Or do you think it's just, he's just wired differently than most people?
Well, I think the thing that he likes to do, and I think that's what kind of has set them apart, maybe, I mean, it's easy to say it when they've won back-to-back championships, but the way that they practice, especially early on, they make it as hard as it can possibly be. They went 2 hours and 15 minutes. He said some of the freshmen' heads were spinning, and there were moments where he needed leadership from the older guys, and so all those things are still kind of in the works. But yeah, I mean, they like to make their practices as intense as possible. It was like maybe 30 seconds after he threw that ball, Alex Caravan's walking across the court with a cut on his hand and blood all over his jersey. I don't know what caused that, maybe like a scratch or something, but yeah, they practice as hard as they can. They like to say they practice, like it's a Big East game, and get ready for that toughness.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Alex, but you obviously said you didn't know what happened there. Yeah, I mean, that could be anything, right? It's especially, I love the idea of practices with no fouls called, because one of the things I think that sets them apart from other teams is they know that the Big East isn't going to be, a ticky-tack foul league, right? So we all scream at our televisions about what fouls are and fouls aren't. So I think just kind of getting them ready for what the calls that they're not going to get going into the season is a really smart play and sets them apart. You watched 15 minutes. Was there any like focus initially? I know in the press conference, and we'll talk about Dan's comments in the next segment, but he talked a little bit about how they worked on offense a lot this summer. Now they're working on toughness. Was there like a drill that stood out to you or something in those 15 minutes that were like, okay, that's new, or something that they do all the time?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't anything new. I mean, that 15 minutes was probably 10 minutes of 5-on-5, just scrimmaging. They're sprinting back and forth up and down the court. You know, if a guy lapsed on defense, you know, there's one inbounds play where Samson just came down and got like a lob and just dunked it like right away, and Kamani was pissed. Made them, you know, line up on the baseline and run just real quick, and then they got right back to it. But yeah, most of it was, you know, those 5-on-5, you know, sort of scrimmage like drills, and then the last 5 was just like a free throw circuit where they were all in a circle. You had to make 2, or else they would move on. And essentially, you know, they just went around until no one missed. But the guys that did miss, they went afterwards. I don't know all the exact rules of the drill, but yeah, so that's what we saw. You know, didn't get to see a whole lot, but yeah, we saw, you know, an Aiden Mahaney 3, we saw a Liam McNeely 3, we saw some good passing from Jalen Stewart, Alex Caravan, of course, and yeah, Solo looked good, be a prominent ball handler. So
I love it. Well, when we return, I did have some really interesting quotes from the Dan Hurley media availability afterwards, so I wanted to go over that with you, Joe. But we're going to go pay a quick bill and come back with more Locked On UConn after this. Hey, NFL fans, you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get to start with $200 in bonus bets if you're a new customer, guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's at FanDuel.com. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, you're back on Locked On UConn with Hartford current beat reporter Joe Arruda. Thanks for joining us today, Joe. I want to touch on Dan Hurley's media availability afterwards. So we already talked about day 117. I thought that was the funniest thing from his comments, but also I because I knew it came from a player, I did want to talk about that. Do you think honestly that Dan enjoys? Who does Dan enjoy trolling more? Other programs, or do you think he loves just kind of throwing out, you know, ridiculous things like, you know, day 117s? Like, because I saw the clip where he was just like, we have a graphic made up. All right. Yeah. Go ahead. Put up the graphic. Like, do you think he loves that more than sometimes even just kind of like the practices himself?
No, I wouldn't say that, but yeah, I do think that he likes it.
Yeah.
You know, there was the Game of Thrones clip that he posted last year.
Oh my God. That was beautiful.
That was awesome. You know, but he doesn't use social media a ton. So whenever he does, it's kind of like people look and see what it is, and usually it's pretty funny. So yeah, I think that was I don't really know what that was. I think it was kind of just, you know, we haven't stopped yet.
Oh yeah, I totally. I think that has a lot to do with, you know, honestly, I'll get your take on it, but it's probably why a lot of fans love him so much and why other fan bases hate him so much, is because he will stop at nothing to talk about how they're doing more than other programs, and kind of just letting people know that, I think partly because, and I've said this a bunch, is that he doesn't feel like they get the recognition they deserve. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. You know, I don't know what else. You know, he's been on almost every podcast, you know, that exists, you know, since, you know, over this offseason, and, you know,
not everyone. He hasn't come on here yet.
Almost. I'm sure he will soon. But yeah, I mean, he thinks they should be the consensus #1 team in the country. You know, you lost 4 out of 5 starters. So I think, you know, that seems kind of, Hurley would say. I would expect that out of him. But he likes to make those comments. He likes to hype up his program, and he has a lot of pride in what they're working on and what they're doing, and he wants people to know about it. So he's not afraid to say it.
Yeah, and I agree with him only because I've talked about this on other podcasts when they've asked me about that. And they've said the exact same thing, Joe. Like, well, what do you expect? They lost 4 NBA players. They lost, they're bringing in 2 freshmen, 2 transfers you're not sure about, blah, 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 blah. And I always come back with the coaching gap is so wide between what Dan Hurley is putting out there and the rest of the programs right now that whoever he brings in, he feels like they do a good enough job vetting their players that I think at this point you have to give the guy the benefit of the doubt and not do with conventional wisdom of, okay, such and such left. We're probably going to like rank you in the top 5 or whatever that is. So I agree with them based off of that. I'll ask you about that because it leads into another question. He talked about, I guess there was a question about transfer portal and why they've been so successful. Can you talk about, his comments in terms of their evaluation process? Because I've talked a lot about that in the recruiting stuff. How much time do you feel like they spend evaluating not just the players, but kind of like how that makes sense for UConn in getting roles for guys like Aiden and guys like Terrace?
Yeah, I think one of the most important things with that is, when the guys come on campus and they do their film, they picture that player on the film and they'll show the player, this is what we would want you to do here is, we think you're capable of doing this here. And then they, read what the player's reaction is. And if he wants to be a part of it, then he comes. And the other thing is, the NIL stuff, he said, if you walk in and ask him about NIL right off the bat, he doesn't want you.
Right.
So I think that's, part of it as well. Just getting to know the players and, Coach, Luke Murray does a very good job at, making those connections, and Kamani does as well, for them, as far as their process goes. But yeah, I don't know exactly which comment you're referring to, but, out of the portal, that's how they've gotten guys.
Yeah. The question to him was, you guys have had like remarkable success in the transfer portal. Can you talk about, what they do? And his question or his answer was essentially exactly what you said, that Kamani and Luke do an amazing job of kind of making sure that we have the right, key players in here. And then we kind of go from there. So, you answered it perfectly. So yeah, I agree. And it shows with the type of players they bring in. They don't just kind of go and get random players just because they're talented, right? It has to fit the system. Tell me about some of the stuff he talked about with tampering. Do you have a guess who he's talking about?
No, I don't. And he's brought that up a few times over the last, couple of years.
Yep.
I know for a fact, well, I've been told that, Samson was getting, 2 years ago, the 2023 championship season, he was getting, coaches reaching out to him, trying to pull him away. And he never even blinked at him, which says something about, what UConn has in their development, part, because, now he's set up to be a starter and, we'll see what he can do. But yeah, I think he likes to emphasize that they're doing it the right way. And,
yep.
There is tampering going on. That's not like a secret in any college sport. But yeah, he, I don't know. I think he just says things like that to be funny and,
that's the trolling part. That's exactly that's
part of it.
I think he loves it. I think if there's an opportunity to troll, he's going to troll and kind of bust chops like we used to say back in the day. So you brought up Samson, a great segue. You're a pro at this. He talked about this in the media availability as well, that the opportunity is there. The table has been set for him to kind of take those next steps. I was fascinated by one comment. He said that they are building a system around Samson. Almost they're looking at some of the stuff that Marquette did with Oso Ighodaro, the second round draft pick out of Marquette, who is, as we all know, was like a 6'11" point forward. I didn't have that on my bingo card going into this year, that Samson Johnson would be used like Oso Ighodaro. Did that surprise some people? Was there like a little bit of buzz on that?
So the Oso comparison didn't surprise me because he's been saying that
okay
since last year. But what surprised me, and I thought you were going to say it, was just the idea that he would be dribbling the ball up the court,
Yeah,
or that he could be dribbling the ball, outside the perimeter.
that's
And
interesting.
yes, that's what Oso did, but he didn't do it that. I mean, they had Tyler Kolek, so he had to do it more when Kolek was injured and didn't really work out that well for him. But yeah, I mean, just picturing Samson, I mean, this could be an entirely different player than what we've seen, because all we've really seen from Samson is above the rim.
Right.
He's a dunker and he can play in the pick and roll game. But if he's dribbling the ball, this offense is going to be completely different from what we've seen, with Donovan Clingan in there. And I think that's what this coaching staff is good at, is, building a scheme and, sort of building a system around, what they've got.
Yeah, I wonder, because it got my mind going on like different roster combinations, like for lineups. And I'm not going to go through them in today, because that could take forever. But I did have this one thought where everyone's thinking about, like, the Alex Caravan playing the 5 so that you could have a bunch of shooters around. I when I heard those comments, I went, I wonder if they're thinking about doing a kind of a similar thing like Marquette, where they essentially, like, if a point guard's in foul trouble, or just to kind of get a kid like Ahmad Noel, who's very good off the ball too, all involved, and just have have Samson play that Oso role, where he's essentially kind of divvying out, just like he did with Marquette, and almost playing in the pick and roll in reverse. So then you always have, for spacing, you always have shooters, at the 4, 3, 2, and 1. If Samson can do that, it would make them so much more difficult to cover. Like, do people talk about that at all? I'm curious.
I mean, yeah, there are plenty of different directions that they could go. I mean, this team is so deep. That's the biggest thing about it, is this team is, they have probably 10, 11 guys that could play.
Right.
And, we've heard about potential lineups with, maybe 3, 6, 8 guys, because they have that Liam McNeely, Alex Caravan, and then like a Jalen Stewart, or maybe a Jaden Ross, or, Isaiah Abraham potentially. So they have a plethora of those, positionless guys. And that's really what they're going for, is positionless basketball. And that's what everyone's really going for now. And Samson definitely helps that if he can. I don't think he's going to be a primary ball handler.
Right.
I think that would be a drastic change from what he was, because we didn't even really see him drive into the paint that much. So yeah, that's interesting. And I wonder how far along his shot has come and how much they actually use it, because they talked about it. They talked about it with Donovan. Donovan never did it. Mm-hmm. Samson, we'll see.
Interesting.
I don't even know if I can't even just imagine off the top of my head. I can't remember watching him take a 3. So we'll see.
And if we remember, like, Oso Ighodaro didn't shoot many threes that I remember. I didn't watch a lot of Marquette games other than when they played us, but I just think it's about initiating offense and having that, like, float game, the ability to kind of do some things because of the quickness. So that's interesting to me. Last thing on positionless basketball, positions that are playing. I've heard great things about Solo, not only from this particular practice, but John Rothstein, who covers college basketball nationally, posted something about, people internally or sent him some messages that they feel like Solo is going to take the next jump. Has Dan talked about that a little bit? And what are your initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, Solo's definitely a guy that they want to get involved. I think they wanted to get involved more last year, but the way that everything played out, everybody above him was just so good, and they played so well together. But yeah, he had some good games. I think, was it the North Carolina game at the Garden where he really stood out?
Yep.
Yeah, and Dan, he said, it was hard to explain to him and his family why he wasn't playing, especially after that game, during the season. And it was just because the team was so deep, but they took it and they understood. And now I think he's ready to step up, and they're going to try to get him involved. And I don't think, necessarily will be that hard, at the guard spot.
No, I think you're right. And I think part of it is because I feel like, like you said, there's a myriad ways that they can get people involved. And I think we're all kind of worried about playing time for certain players, but I think the bottom line is, and I think the coaching staff knows this, that the players that are doing the most with their opportunities are the ones that are going to play. And I think that's always what the sense I get from this organization. So we're gonna pivot a little bit, and when we return, Joe also covers the 3-2 UConn football Huskies, and we're going to talk about the game last Saturday and looking forward to Temple and the rest of the season. A lot out in front of this Husky football program under Jim Mora. Let's go pay some bills, make sure I keep my job, and we'll talk about it after this. Everyone remembers Game Time, the fastest and easiest way to get tickets to your favorite events, whether it's sports, concerts, or theater. So let me tell you, if you're a UConn fan like me, this Saturday is the perfect time to use Game Time. The Huskies are at home against the Temple Owls. With Game Time's new feature, Game Time Picks, grabbing tickets has never been easier. Game Time filters out all the fluff to show you the absolute best deals on your seats, so you can focus on getting hyped for the game instead of hunting for tickets. I personally love the curated deals on Game Time. It's super easy to find the best prices, and the app even lets you see the view from your seat before you buy. So no surprises, just killer seats. You can see if there's any blind spots. Rents or fill, you should have no issue getting a fantastic seat. So, and also if you can find a cheaper ticket somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. So how awesome is that? So what are you waiting for? Don't miss UConn versus Temple this weekend. Head to Game Time, download the app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That's Game Time, last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, let's bring back Joe Arruda of the Hartford Courant. Joe is with us. You're back on Locked On UConn. Pretty damn good start for the football team, huh? Especially considering I've done 5 weeks of football coverage, and it's about a 360-degree difference from the first day to now, which was, man, I just hope we're competitive, to now this team could run the table. That's the energy I'm getting. Talk to me about, and that's not even a question. That's just a statement. I have one specific question, because you were there and I saw you were tweeting out some stuff during the game. What happened on the sideline with Jim Mora?
Yeah. So from my understanding of what it was, I looked over, so I was late. But I just we were having a conversation. I saw in my periphery just a bunch of guys gathered in the end zone.
Yeah.
And I looked and I seen a bunch of Buffalo players on UConn's side when they were trying to warm up, and that's essentially what it was. And we've seen those type of things in football all the time. There was Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes with the kicking tee last year. I think it was maybe Justin Tucker.
Yeah, you're right.
But yeah, that's essentially what it was. And Tui Famina Brown told us afterward. He goes, "Yeah, they had like a heckler who was pushing up on us and walking through our warm up." And I think there might have been a little bit of confusion for them, as the visitors, which side they're supposed to, whatever. But yeah, I mean, the star of that whole thing was defensive line assistant coach Mickey Grace.
Oh, okay.
Who she looked like, she had legit offensive lineman skill set. The way that she was moving her feet to block everybody, in protection. So if you watch that video back, look for Mickey Grace, because then when Jim Mora came out afterwards, which was after my video ended, she was the one on Jim Mora duty, keeping him away.
Oh, okay.
So I wanted to point that out because it was I think it's really funny if you go back and look, but it was impressive.
That's awesome.
But yeah, I mean, he's gonna defend his guys.
Yeah, no, and it didn't look like there was any bad blood between him and what's Coach Lembo, is that his name, from Buffalo, at the end of the game when they shook hands and everything like that. Because when they started to really just like take them down at the end of the game, when it was 47-3, I know we're kind of going backwards, but I thought maybe if he was really fired up at them, when it was 4th down and they were in field goal range, they would have tried like a 48-yard field goal to give Freeman another crack at a long field goal, since his confidence is so high right now, and also to put 50 on him. But when that didn't happen, I was just like, probably was just kind of like a misunderstanding. But hey, it all helps, right? When you're trying to get fired up for a game and you feel like there's a disrespect against you, then that's something that you can kind of take to heart. All right, so I talked about this on last Friday on our Football Friday show, and then the live reaction show. Initially, I've been really questioning some of Gordon Samus's play calls. This was the beginning of the season. I was like, I'm an idiot. Gordon Samus was so good on Saturday But I also feel like Matt Brock deserves so much credit for what he's done with this defense with that 3-3-5. Tell me about these two offensive coordinators. I don't care what order you go, because they both deserve their kudos.
Well, Gordon Samus, I think early in the season, a lot of the criticism was coming because the plays didn't work. It's not that they're bad plays. Just because they don't work doesn't necessarily mean they're bad plays. And I'm not saying that there weren't any questionable calls.
Sure.
Because I was definitely questioning some. But, I had my mentions were full with, fire this guy, fire that guy, sit this guy, sit that guy. It's the team, when you go out for your first game, when you have that many new players, and you have a new coordinator, and you have a quarterback who's never started in college game before, you're still learning about what you have. And I think what we've seen in the last couple of weeks is them realizing what they have and finding ways to make it work. It sucked that Nick Evers got hurt, because, he brings an element of running, and he still has, work to do and confidence to build. And, again, he's only played about like maybe two full games in his career or something like that. But yeah, I think what we've seen on offense is just, everybody getting on the same page and realizing what they have. And, the running backs and the offensive line has definitely helped. Defensively, I watched the game back and just focused on defense. I would suggest to watch linebackers, and then whenever the camera cuts, find the guy in the red sweater and look for Matt Brock if he's not, drawing all the attention already, because he is fun to watch on the sideline. But yeah, I mean, you never know where guys are coming from. And the thing that stood out to me, especially with the defense, was everything that they told us before the season that they wanted it to look like was exactly what it looked like against Buffalo. And obviously there's still room to grow there, but with the pass rush, I mean, Buffalo's offensive line didn't stand a chance. So looking at Temple this week, that's going to be a big point of emphasis.
Yeah, I gave Matt Brock a ton of credit on the live reaction show. I thought there was like two plays that crystallized how effective he was in confusing Buffalo from the start, right? Which was two PBUs, two pass breakups with Jelani Stafford and Jack Barton, where they both dropped into coverage, and they thought they had something there where they kind of read it specifically, and they both were just able to almost be in the passing lane before the quarterback even knew what hit him. So lucky to not have him intercepted, in particular with the one with Jelani. So I just thought that was really interesting, because the beginning of the year we were curious about whether or not this team could hold up and do some of those things, like against the run. Being a 3-3-5, you kind of have to have that initial point of attack with Jelani Stafford and others to kind of put some pressure on the team. So I just think the growth in this defense from week one to now is just remarkable. So I can't emphasize that enough. And also, the secondary played great. I mean, anything that was thrown, I mean, I think there was one pass that got behind and the guy dropped it. It was a pretty decent ball. But outside of that, there weren't really many opportunities to make big plays. Do you agree?
Oh yeah, I think a lot of that was because of the pass rush. And
absolutely,
I mean, if you want to see how confusing his defense is, watch either Langston Hardy's sack or Tui's, or both of them. Because basically they're trying to guess which guy's coming,
right?
And they get it wrong both times. And those plays were great. But like I said about the offense, the defense is the same thing. They're playing an entirely new system, one that's unorthodox, and it's so challenging for other teams because it is so rare. Not everybody plays that scheme. So. Yeah, I think they're just coming along more as they, the more they play in it, the more comfortable they are, and the more, decisive they are in terms of, where to commit.
For sure. And I'll say, for the record, our show probably did a better job of quelling some of those early frustrations that, yes, this is a new system. We get it. We don't want to, we weren't ever critical of like kickers or players or any of the stuff that was going on. It was mostly just, I felt like the mindset needed to be where it is now, which is like, I don't feel like these guys are ever not ready to play. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of where my head was at, and some of the co-hosts that I have for my Football Friday show, which was just basically like, we just want to see this team give the maximum effort. And if they get their tails kicked because of it, then it is what it is, man. That team was better. Like, I just don't feel like the Duke game, that was a better team than us. That I feel like we kind of got a little unlucky, and also a couple questionable calls, but it is what it is. They're 3-2 now. And I asked you this question because this is kind of circulating. I mean, UConn is favored in the kind of the FPI or BPI, whatever it's called, every game the rest of the way. Can this team truly run the table?
Well, first off, I don't know how they come up with that metric. And I don't know how they come up with – I'll just get off that tangent. That's a tangent. ESPN, when they do their, like, percentage thing on the games,
Yeah.
you know what I'm talking about? Those
Yeah.
don't ever seem accurate. But anyways, I do think that there's a decent chance that this team could win out. I mean, the two toughest games that I see on the schedule are, obviously Wake Forest and Syracuse. I think Syracuse is a lot tougher than Wake Forest, and we'll see, what happens at that point of the season because, teams change so much.
Mm-hmm.
But what will be really interesting with this team, and we saw it a little bit 2 years ago when they made the bowl game, it was, how do you deal with success? They've won 2 games in a row. Temple, I don't want to use the term letdown because I know UConn fans had a fun time with the word letdown this last weekend. But yeah, I mean, you could come out flat against Temple and then, who knows? But then, there's also the question, you go on the road after playing 6 straight home games, what happens there? So, saying a team could win out at this point is, it's hard to say, but especially with, the history of it. But, I think there's a possibility. I think they'll be competitive in every game from here on out.
Yeah, I agree with you, man. What's your gut feeling for all of our bettors out there with FanDuel? This is not an endorsement, but they're a -14 favorite at home against Temple. You laying those points, or are you telling people to stay clear of that?
I'm really bad at betting.
All right, then we'll title this.
If I was going to place one, I would take UConn in the points.
Okay, we'll title this Joe's bets sure to go wrong.
There you go. As long as you put that little disclaimer there.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I like to use Army as kind of a measuring stick. And looking at their stats against Army, which obviously Army runs the triple option. They threw the ball 6 times or 7 times. But they ran for 417 yards and 5 touchdowns. And Temple ran for -5.
Yeah.
So, just from there, and obviously UConn's running game, it doesn't seem like Nick will be able to come back after, getting, a hit to the head, a knee to the head, really. It's hard to imagine him coming back with the second head injury in, 5 weeks. But, even with Joe, and that stable of running backs, that could be, really a decisive, part of the game.
Have we heard anything about it? Did Nick suffer a concussion? I don't think I ever heard that or not.
Nothing has been confirmed yet. We'll talk with Mora tomorrow.
Okay.
We do our Tuesday press conferences with him, so we should know more tomorrow. But I imagine tomorrow he'll tell us he will know closer. But we'll see.
Yeah, I honestly, if he did suffer a concussion, they should be very careful with him. But if it was just, they're just being cautious anyway because he did have a concussion earlier in the year and he got his bell rung, and it wasn't or it was like a milder concussion, whatever it is. Extreme caution. I think Joey Faiano is doing an amazing job as the backup, and also he looks damn good in this offense too. So you're right. So with Nick, with that in mind, I hope Nick is healthy and gets back as quickly as possible. But I'm with you, man. I think if we're both, playing with funny money and it doesn't matter, I'm laying the 14 points because if there's one thing I know about betting is you go with the hot hand. And right now there's not a hotter team in college football that's, than UConn. It's so wild to say those words out loud and have people not laugh at you. But it's the truth. I mean, when was the last time Fox's main page posted that UConn football dominated on a Saturday? Has it ever happened? I don't think so.
I don't know.
I doubt it. Well, listen, Joe, I really appreciate your time, man. You do such a great job with the Hartford Courant. tell everyone where they can find your stuff. And obviously they see your X handle on here at Joe Arruda 9 if they want to follow you there. But if you tell them where they can find your articles and things like that.
Yeah, just Joe Arruda 9. I try to tweet out all my stories. Current.com, COURANT. You'll find stuff from me. You'll find stuff from our Sports Writer of the Year columnist, Dama More, and awesome, women's basketball coverage, from Emily Adams, and everything's there.
All right. I'm gonna have to get with Emily Adams soon because the women's show is starting tomorrow. What a tease. Men's and women's coverage from Locked On UConn. They have their own shows starting October 1st. So we'll have to get Emily on and get her perspective. But for Joe Arruda, I'm your host, Mark Znetto, asking you to stay locked in, stay locked on. Make sure that toughness meter is always rising. And as always, guys, go Huskies.